Well, good day, viewers. Today we have an 06 GMC Sierra 1500 4x4 with the 5.3 VIN T. It started smoking white smoke out of the tailpipe and misfiring, and now the engine's hydraulically locked. I see the cooling system is very low. Let's check the engine oil. Yeah, it's about 2 inches above the full mark, so I suspect that the crankcase is full of antifreeze. It hasn't run like that, so the antifreeze will be settled in the bottom of the crankcase. We're going to pull the heads off of it. I'm going to pull the spark plugs out and see if I can figure out what cylinder has coolant in it. I suspect a blown head gasket or cracked head gasket. So I'll bring you along the way as we go through strategic spots. So remove the air induction components, the cosmetic cover on top of the engine, start disconnecting the electrical connectors, throttle body assembly, canister purge solenoid. This line is released by pushing in on this tab and pushing it to the right, or this way anyways. And we're going to release it at the back of the intake manifold by the bell housing. There's the one, because the line goes through these fuel lines. Disconnect the alternator, remove the serpentine belt. I gotta check some pulleys. This pulley's kind of loud, so I'll be putting new pulley on there because it's plastic, so I can't change just the bearing. This coolant hose can stay on here. The water pump's been changed in the past, so I know it should be okay. And we're gonna remove some plumbing on top here. I'm going to set this up on the hoist and disconnect the exhaust before we disconnect any of the fuel lines, in case I have to use heat on the fuel lines or heat on the exhaust parts, which is a possibility because I put headers on this thing probably about 8 years ago, so 7 or 8 years ago, but I'm sure the bolts will be rusty. Well, that's not looking too promising. These exhaust bolts are pretty rotted. Now fortunately they're bolts and nuts, so I can just cut the heads of the bolts off, but I prefer not to use torches in here. Look at this frickin' tranny cooler line is pretty rusty as well, and I changed those when I did the transmission 5 years ago. Oh well, if it was easy anybody could do it. Well, we'll get the Sawzall and torches out. So using an air chisel, I was able to split the nuts. Long air chisel. So there's the 3 nuts off the driver's side. As I said, they're bolts and nuts now because of the headers. That's what the original nut looked like, and that's what's left of it after 7 years of salt spray. Pretty incredible how eroded they are, but actually that's actually better because it could just chisel them with the air chisel and they come off. So I chiseled off the nut on the inboard one, and then I cut the other 2. On this side here, the one bolt is directly in line with the O2 sensor there, so if you're going to try to take the nut off, you almost have to take the O2 sensor out. But we've got bolts and nuts on this because it's an aftermarket manifold or aftermarket header, so that allows me to cut them. If they were original, you wouldn't want to cut the studs because they're threaded into the original exhaust manifold. So remove the right and left coil pack assemblies. There's one connector in the middle up here you can unplug. Disconnect the injectors. The injector connectors are kind of a challenge. You have to pull this blue plastic secondary lock up in 2 steps and then depress that gray clip underneath there to release the injector harness from each injector. A small screwdriver helps. Now we need to take this dipstick tube out, but it's not coming out. And last time I did this, I actually cut the dipstick bracket and then re-welded it, but I've since learned another way is to cut the actual dipstick tube below the manifold with a Sawzall and join it back together with a 3/8 threaded union. Make sure you take the actual dipstick out of the tube before you cut it with a Sawzall. Otherwise you'll have a 2-piece dipstick. So I did manage to get the dipstick tube out, I twisted it a little bit and it was turning, so I sprayed some penetrating fluid around the base and worked it, and I used a fork tool to get underneath here and tap it up from in front of the starter. So I got it out. It's pretty rusty, so I might try and find a used one or another new one. Here's the plugs out of the right side. No coolant. These plugs have been changed once. They were changed at 260,000 kilometers. And now it's got 360, so they got about 100,000 kilometers on them. They look pretty decent. You can see they're all burning clean. I'm probably going to put a set in, but it really doesn't need them. So there's the intake manifold off. I managed to weasel it out from underneath this evap purge line. I'm going to disconnect it. There's a release clip at the back there, right there, but I couldn't release it by hand. But once the intake manifold's out of the way, to install it after, it just snaps on. It's the same as this clip here. It's just that it's a little bit rusty on the pipe, so it doesn't want to come off. But for now, it can just stay off to one side like that. It doesn't hurt anything. While you're here, pull these grommets out and check the knock sensors underneath here, because they have a tendency to get water. I don't wash my engine, so it should be okay, but I'm going to pull these off and have a look inside there to make sure that the knock sensors aren't all rusty and corroded, because they will fail. Now's the time to change them because you're here. You need a fuel line disconnect tool. Now we're going to remove the exhaust manifold on the left side. So I find it beneficial to disconnect the steering shaft. That gives you a little bit more room. Make sure you don't turn the steering wheel. I had to turn it just about 5 degrees to the right to put that bolt upwards, the pinch bolt on the intermediate steering shaft there. And got the plug wires off. We're going to stick the spark plugs out on this side now and see what coolant comes out of what cylinder. Putting those headers on 7 years ago with never sees on the bolts helped. Every one of the bolts came out, although I did have to use these reverse easy outs because the head of the bolt is no longer 13 mil. It's closer to 12. Anyways, the exhaust manifolds are off. I'm not going to pull the spark plugs out of this side. I'm going to put a plug in that catalytic converter so we don't drop anything in there. I always do that. So number 5, 135, number 5 cylinder. You can see the coolant running out of the spark plug hole. So there's a testament to good maintenance. This thing has 380,000 kilometers on it. Look at the inside of the valve cover, inside of the cylinder head. That's on the left side, and the right side is just as clean. Been running Castrol Syntec since it was brand new in 2005. So it's a good idea to keep all the rocker arms in order. So this is down the left bank, this is down the right bank, and keep all the push rods in order too. Inspect each push rod tip for signs of wear. Here's one from a previous job. You can see, focus, you can see the wear marks on it. So if the push rod is like that, this is not one of mine, this is from a previous job last week actually, then you're going to have to change the push rod and the appropriate rocker arm because they're both worn. Now all of these push rods have normal wear marks on them, no abnormal problems, so we're going to be able to reuse them all. It's a bonus. So remove the 4 bolts, 3 on top and 1 below the pulley on the power steering bracket. You don't need to take it right off. And then 1 brace bolt down there on the side of the block, and then tip the power steering bracket assembly forward because it's bolted to this cylinder head. Remove that cross tube that supplies coolant to the throttle body, and I'm going to have to see if I can find one of those. It's pretty rusty. You might have to remove those block off caps at the back too, because sometimes the small bolts, these ones here, don't come out because they hit that block off. So I'm gonna see about that. And we're ready to remove the head bolts and remove the head. I've drained the coolant by taking the heater hose off on this side, and that's basically it, just the head bolts. So there's the left cylinder head off. You can see the evidence of coolant ingestion in number 5. number 135. The third one back is number 5. Cylinder wall looks good. There's virtually no ridge in this thing. No wear mark at all evident. Let's have a look at the head gasket. So here is the cylinder head that's off the left side, and you can see the head gasket failure here. But look at this. This head gasket failed at the back as well, but it wasn't leaking coolant in the cylinder in the back. Not yet anyways. That's interesting. Well, we're going to pull the other head off, and then we're going to strip this head and send it out for checking, resurfacing, and rebuilding. So there's the right side cylinder head off. No evidence of coolant leaking into the cylinders yet. And I often get asked, well, should I do both head gaskets? Well, if you're at this point in the game, let's have a look at this head gasket on the right hand side, which wasn't leaking. Look at that. So why wasn't that leaking yet? Or did that just break now when I took it off? There's no evidence of coolant in this cylinder. It looks normal combustion colors compared to this one where it was washed from the antifreeze. And it only ran like this with the smoke for like 5 minutes at the very most. So we'll strip this head. It's already stripped actually. And you can see that there was evidence of coolant seeping along the head gasket surface here on this one. I'm not sure about this side. No, this surface looks good, but this one here you can see the dried up deck spool, and that's where the head gasket was cracked on number, that would be number 3, 1, 3, 5, 7. So that's number 3. And I remember about 5-6 years ago I had a bad rad cap and it was steaming in this area. Oh well, let's send the heads out. So to drain the coolant out of the block, I put a little piece of steel tubing down in the cylinder block and blow some compressed air across the tip of the tube, and of course it siphons out after, as you can see. Focus. Doesn't want to focus. Might take a few minutes to run, but who's in a hurry? Just want to get the antifreeze down below the head surface. There's no drain plugs on the actual block. At least I don't believe there is. The only drain plug is actually the block heater on the left hand side rear, but I'm not taking that out. So we're back working on this truck today. It's the next day. I was able to get the cylinder heads reconditioned, resurfaced, and the valves done. I've got the engine block cleaned. Make sure you blow out all the bolt holes with compressed air and make sure there's no coolant in them. And vacuum around the rings, clean the cylinder walls. There's a little bit of scuffing in this cylinder. You can see the scuffing, but with 380,000 on it, that's gonna live like that. We're gonna put the dowels back into the block and put the gaskets on and put the heads back on. So there's gaskets installed with the dowels. I use high-tech gasket spray on them. I don't know if well, some people are going to say don't do that, but I've been doing that for years, so I'm going to continue. Sorry. We're ready to install the heads. So the head bolt torque is 22 foot-pounds for the initial pass, starting in the center and working to the ends. And I usually go over it a second time because usually the middle couple bolts will take a little bit more torque afterwards. Once they're all torqued to 22, turn each bolt 90 degrees and then 70 degrees. Again, starting from the middle and working to the ends. What I do is I mark the bolt, as you can see here, with a black marker. In this case facing towards the inside, so when I'm done I can tell if I've turned that bolt. Again, 90 degrees is a quarter turn and 70 degrees is just about a third of a turn. So you should be using a torque angle meter, but it's just as easy to mark the bolts and pay attention that way. I would highly recommend to mark the bolts anyways, just in case you lose track of which ones you did. So I managed to find a previously enjoyed pipe, and it's like pristine. Special shout out to John Furtado at Thunder Bay Auto Parts. Great guy, very knowledgeable used parts guy. Look him up if you're ever in Thunder Bay. Anyways, we're going to put this on, change the O-rings on it. I've got the rear block offs installed, heads torqued down, and we're going to continue assembly. So there's all the push rods and rocker arms reinstalled. Rocker arm bolts are 22 foot-pounds. And I guess the next thing we'll do is put the valve covers on, close up the top of the engine as much as possible. So it's coming along, the intake's back on, right side coil pack and plugs are all in. I still got to put the plug wires on the left side, but the coil pack's installed, wiring harness is all hooked up, alternator's back on. Make sure you clean the eyelet on the terminal. Change the tensioner bearing and the AC compressor tensioner is shot. The spring is broken in here, so I'm going to try and put a stretch belt from one of the newer ones on and bypass the tensioner altogether. Because the new trucks, I don't know what year they started, like 2012 or something like that, they went to a stretch belt instead of a tensioner. So I think it's the same distance between the center of the AC compressor and the harmonic balancer center line, but we'll see. So this is the tensioner assembly from Gates, and this is the belt that it calls for, 378. And this is a stretch belt for the newer truck, so we're going to try and put the stretch belt on by itself. So this is how I start these stretch belts. Put it on the AC compressor, and put it on the inside of the pulley, and put a tie wrap through the opening in the pulley over the belt, and then turn the engine in the normal rotation of the engine until the belt's going on. You have to keep the AC compressor belt from walking off the AC compressor as you're doing this. Probably would have been better to do this when the plugs were out. Man, that's tight. Are we on? Are we close to being on? No. No, we're not going to be able to do this. That's too tight. Maybe a longer stretch belt would work. But we're going to put the conventional stuff back on. So there it is, back together. I drained the oil out of it. There was about 2 liters of antifreeze in the bottom of the pan. So I put some stock, some basic 530 engine oil in it. I'm going to run it for a half an hour and then drain it out and put new oil and filter on it. Cooling system is topped up. We're about to start it. Moment of truth. So let's see how it starts. Turn the key. Sounds like I might have an exhaust leak. Yeah. I didn't have a new gasket for that exhaust flange. Well, it seems to be running fine. You can hear a spark jumping. I wonder if one of my plug wires isn't on all the way. Well, we'll run it up to temperature and take it for a road test. But that's probably it. So we have a bit of a problem. I guess that sensor on bank 1, because it had the coolant leak on that bank, it's contaminated the O2 sensor. You can see it's pegged at 0 volts. It's set at P0171. Fuel trim on bank 1 is at 25% additional fuel, long term, and 27% short term. You have the bank O2 sensor is working fine. So it needs an O2 sensor. Damn. Oh well, that's no big deal. Okay, so I did manage to find a new oxygen sensor. I think that oxygen sensor was damaged by me using the air chisel near it, because it rattles now, so chances are the ceramic got broken inside. Let's see, where are we? Fuel trim reset. So we're going to reset the fuel trims, because I changed the oxygen sensor. I dropped the oil out of it. Reset. Exit. Go back. Back. Data. Fuel trim data. We're going to start it up and have a look at fuel trims now. So I just started. It's an open loop. Bank 1 sensor 1 is here. It's in closed loop now. Bank 2 sensor 1. So this is the one I just changed right here. So that's a new sensor in there. And I reset the fuel trims so we don't have, the short term is not at plus 27% anymore. So give it a chance to stabilize and see how it works. But I think that's going to be fine now. So this sensor's been replaced before. I don't know if the camera's going to pick that rattle up, but there's a rattle in it. So, thanks for watching.